So this class is Rethinking Rain. We're going to talk a little bit about the why behind some of our stormwater management and rain practices. So as Sean mentioned, my name is Eric. I'm the Conservation Program Supervisor here. I've worked in conservation for about 15 years, give or take a few career detours. My background is actually in watershed ecology. That's what I studied for my master's. So this is a subject of particular interest to me. I focused on wetlands and primarily on stream water management, and then what human civilization and our impacts do to our water system and cycle. So we're going to focus on some aspects of that, and then move into things that you can do at your home to help mitigate some of these issues. So what you'll learn today we'll cover some key concepts that will help frame how we think about rain and stormwater. Not just as something to get rid of, but a resource that we can put to work. We'll walk through the basics of the hydrologic cycle and how stormwater fits in, how humans have shaped and changed the way that rainwater moves across the landscape throughout history with some examples, the natural role of rainwater in healthy ecosystems and why it matters, and what happens when we disrupt the hydrologic cycle, both in our communities and the environment, and what low impact development is, or LID as we'll refer to it in the class, and why it's such an important approach for addressing these issues. We'll talk through some real world solutions at all scales, from city and community down to the things that you can do at your own home. And most importantly, we'll rethink rain. So we'll shift your mindset, hopefully, from stormwater as a problem to rainwater as an opportunity. So rain, our most essential natural resource, even though we often don't think about it that much. Water is really humankind's most vital natural resource. It shapes where plants and animals live and sustains our cultures and economies. Here in Utah, where droughts are common, water availability is even more crucial. We get about 16.9 to 17 inches of rain per year statewide. It's a statewide average. And that means we're usually the third or fourth driest state, just behind Nevada and Arizona, sometimes New Mexico. They change from year to year, but that's a general average and where we're at. So we're very dry here. As we move through these next few slides, just think about how clean, abundant rainwater connects to every part of your life here in Utah. So rain and snowmelt are the lifeblood of Utah's natural ecosystems. They don't just shape the landscape, they sustain the living systems that we rely on. So the species shown here are all threatened or endangered in Utah. They all depend on healthy functioning watersheds. So the Great Salt Lake and its wetlands support over 10 million birds, representing about 338 species, many of which could not survive without this system. Each spring and fall, between 2 and 5 million shorebirds, including the eared grebe in the top left there, and thousands of other waterfowl stop here to rest and refuel during their migrations. The western boreal toad at the top right, once common across Utah, has declined sharply over the past few decades due to pollution and watershed mismanagement. Utah prairie dog at the bottom left is also in sharp decline. While it doesn't drink water much in its life cycle, fun fact, it depends on meadows and grasses that are really shaped by the summer rains that we get here. And last but not least, the critically endangered June sucker at the bottom right. This is a species that's been of particular interest because it is critically endangered, but something that here at Jordan Valley that we support financially quite a bit, the restoration, as well as Central Utah Water Conservancy District and the Division of Water Resources. But it's endemic to Utah, and it's only found in Utah Lake and the Provo River. And that also depends on healthy aquatic systems supported by rain. So these systems only exist when rainwater and snowmelt are allowed to slow down, soak in, and move naturally through our landscape. So our landscapes and wildlife tell a really powerful story here. When water stays, life stays. When water runs off too quickly, that life, from the fish to the frogs to the prairie dogs, begins to disappear. So moving on to basic human needs. We rely on rainwater not just for nature, but it's every part of our daily life. So drinking water, irrigating our landscapes, cooking, basic routines like showering and washing your car, they all depend on a steady, reliable water supply. Irrigation, shown in the bottom there, that uses about 40% of our total culinary water in Utah. So nearly half of the treated water that's primarily meant for drinking is used on our landscapes. And nearly all of that water, the water that we have access to, ultimately comes from rainfall and snowmelt. So even if we don't always see it until it pours from the faucet on command, our lives are deeply tied to rainwater. Economic use, this is another really significant one here. So rain and snowmelt drive major sectors of Utah's economy. Agriculture relies heavily on this water. There's about, I believe, 17,000 farms across the state. And that adds 2.3 billion to our economy every year. The Great Salt Lake, in particular, supports some major industries that aren't found in other parts of the country. So one of those is magnesium production, lithium more recently. Those are in the top right corner there. There's some lithium mines being shown. And salt production shown in the lower left. These contribute, mineral extraction alone contributes $1 billion to our economy in total each year. And the lower left, the salt production contributes about 3.3 million tons of salt and 200 million. And then there's brine shrimp harvesting. That's a huge one. This is a uniquely Utah industry. There's very few places in the world that can produce it the way that we do. This industry generates 65 million annually, and it supports 45% of our global supply of brine shrimp, which is a key species for supporting aquaculture around the world. So as a conservation professional, I have mixed feelings about some of these uses, but they all fall under the beneficial uses of water, and they're of huge economic significance to our state. But the really important key element here in showing you all these pictures and these different slides and how water interacts and rainwater interacts with us is just some level setting to show that none of these industries, none of this exists without a healthy water cycle. So last, we'll just touch on tourism, recreation also. Rainwater drives recreation and tourism in Utah. This is a major sector of our economy also. We've got world-class skiing, there's boating, excellent fly fishing, and even our lush green golf courses across the state are all possible because of rain and snowfall that we receive. So tourism alone brought in more than 10 billion to Utah's economy in 2019. And during the record-breaking 22-23 ski season, visitors brought in 2 billion to our economy. So if you look at the tax revenue and the amount of industry and tourism, much of that is really tied to water for us, and rainwater in particular, even in one of the driest states in the US. So in short, rain shapes everything, from the mountains to our homes, from the economy to the ecosystems that define our identity as Utahns. So to really understand how water moves through our environment, let's zoom out a little bit and look at the larger systems that carry it. Let's start with Utah's major river basins, or our watersheds. These basins divide our state into distinct hydrologic regions, each one shaped by where water flows, where it collects, and ultimately where it drains. That's sort of the dividing line, how we define watersheds most simply. So together, these form our water system and how it moves through the landscape. So put simply, watershed is an area of land where all precipitation drains into a shared outlet, whether that's a river, a lake, or a bay. But water doesn't stay put. It moves through a connected living network, linking mountains, valleys, cities, and ecosystems, carrying life, resources, and also consequences along the way. Our watersheds include rivers, lakes, and streams, and the groundwater beneath. This is something we're going to focus on quite a bit here. Systems that are profoundly interconnected. So this is a Strahler stream order map. If my screen was, I've got a background right now, but I have one on my wall also. It's a nice thing to look at every day just to remind us, again, even in how one of the driest states, the rivers and streams branch across our landscape like veins. And from the smallest trickles to the most major waterways that define our region, it's like it truly is like the veins of our system, providing life everywhere that water moves. So we're just going to touch on the hydrologic cycle a little bit and then kind of move into some other elements here. You probably remember learning about this. This is a very basic version of the water cycle. Back in elementary school, I think it's usually third or fourth grade that this is covered. This might be the last time that you saw it or thought about it. But at its core, the water cycle is the continuous movement of water from the ground to the atmosphere and back again. So here in Utah, most of our waterfalls is snow in the mountains. In the spring, that snowmelt flows into streams, rivers, and lakes. Then it evaporates, forms clouds, and eventually returns as rain or snow. So what this simple picture leaves out is one of the most critical parts of the cycle. It's the water that moves underground. When rain and snowmelt soak into the soil, they recharge our aquifers and help keep rivers, springs, and wetlands alive, even when it isn't raining. So understanding this underground flow is a key element of what we're going to get into. We'll get into it in quite a bit more detail. It's actually a pretty exciting subject, so I hope you're all enjoying it so far. So it plays a big role in long-term water availability and our ecosystem resilience, especially in dry areas like ours. So let's look a little bit closer at what happens when rain and snow actually hit the ground, where it falls, where it goes. When rain falls on the natural environments, on our mountains, forests, prairies, and fields, some of it evaporates, some of it's transpired by plants and captured and returned to the atmosphere. But most of that water is held in the natural contours and basins of the land. From there, it begins to move down into the soil, following channels created by deeply rooted vegetation, where it becomes groundwater. In undeveloped areas, 50 to 60% of rainfall soaks into the ground, helping recharge our aquifers, build underground water storage. We're then at lower elevations where the land dips below the water table. The stored groundwater emerges again into streams, rivers, lakes, springs, and wetlands, keeping them alive even in the driest parts of our year. So this slow, steady movement is known as groundwater flow. It's sometimes also called subsurface flow. And it's one of the quiet but essential parts of our hydrologic system. So now we're going to touch on base flow. When groundwater fills the soil and the rocks below, it doesn't just stay locked away. At those lower elevations where the land meets the water table, groundwater naturally emerges again and becomes surface water. You can see in this image the darker blue area at the bottom. That's the water table. And where it meets the elevation of the stream bed, the water begins to flow into the stream. So this steady supply of groundwater, again, enters into our streams, rivers, and lakes, and we call that base flow. So base flow is what keeps our waterways flowing all season long, even when it's not raining or snowing. And when we lower that water table and we're not recharging, base flow disappears. Streams dry up, which weakens ecosystems, and the landscape begins to lose a lot of its resilience. So what's the role of base flow in our watershed in particular? So now that we've seen how groundwater supports stream flow, let's talk a little bit about what happens when it disappears. So historically, base flow in our watershed supplied up to 50% of Utah stream flow annually. So up to half was supported by base flow. But as we've built over natural landscapes, we've reduced the ability of water to soak into the ground. And that means less groundwater and weaker streams and systems. We often think of rivers as surface systems, but again, what's below ground matters just as much. So groundwater and surface water are really one single system. And when recharge is lost, streams dry up, wetlands shrink, and our ecosystems suffer. So the core issue is we can't protect rivers and lakes without also protecting the slow, quiet flow beneath our feet. So the disappearing water beneath our feet. This is a image taken from essentially the same location, Great Salt Lake image of some years ago, and then more recently. So we're now seeing the real consequences of lost groundwater recharge. Streams that once flowed year-round are now only seasonal, and lakes and wetlands are shrinking. They're losing the steady base flow that once sustained us. And aquifers, our underground water reserves, are running low. This isn't just happening in isolated areas, it's reshaping our watersheds really across the country, across the world, and it's affecting how water moves, how long it stays, and whether or not ecosystems and our communities can rely on it in the future. So where did the water go? Let's take a look at a really nice visible example, something where most of us are probably familiar with, the Spiral Jetty at the Great Salt Lake. On the left, you can see it in 1994, still partially submerged or almost entirely submerged. And today on the right, completely exposed, surrounded by dry land. And again, this isn't just a surface change. This is occurring below the ground also. So long-term monitoring around the Great Salt Lake shows a steady decline in groundwater starting in the early 1950s. More recently, a published study showed that more than 700 wells within a 30 square mile radius of the Great Salt Lake have stopped flowing since 1954. But what's really important here is it's not because we're getting less rain. In fact, precipitation has been near or even above average since the late 1960s. There's some years where it dips below that, but our average rainfall is staying the same. So storms are coming. Where's the water going? Yes, groundwater pumping, you might be thinking about that. So actually removing it, mining groundwater, that does play a role. But an equally important aspect is how we manage the rain and snow that hits after it hits the ground. So this is kind of where the real challenge begins. So it's not just about how much rain we get. We know that we're receiving about as much rain as we always have. It's about how the land is receiving it. So this graphic shows how rainwater used to move in a natural landscape compared to how it does now. Before development, rain would land on forest meadows and healthy soil, and about 50 to 60% of that soaked into groundwater, which would replenish our ground flow. Only around 10% ran off the surface. The rest was taken up by plants, returned to the atmosphere through transpiration or evaporation, but much of it was stored. So natural landscapes act as a sponge. In the built environment, we've covered land with hard surfaces, smooth surfaces, impervious surfaces, roads, rooftops, sidewalks, and we've compacted the soil beneath what little landscaping remains. So now, as you can see over there, only about 15% of rainwater soaks in, and over half becomes surface runoff. The roles have essentially flipped in the developed environment versus the natural. So that shift from absorption to runoff, it's the core reason why we're seeing so many challenges with flooding, groundwater loss, and our ecosystem decline. So stormwater, from ancient solutions to modern problems. So the developed environments where water runs off hard surfaces and compacted soils, we call that stormwater. So we're gonna discuss stormwater a little bit here now. So since the earliest cities were built, moving water away has been a top priority. People constructed rooftops, roads, and walkways, and quickly realized they needed a way to prevent flooding. So similar to the way that we do today. So in the top image there, that's actually the earliest known storm drain system. It was built over 4,000 years ago in China's Henan province. So the very earliest cities dealt with the same kinds of problems that we do today, and they built systems that look fairly similar to the way ours do today also. The other two images on the right are actually from Pompeii, and they're over 2,300 years ago. Some of them are actually, this is kind of a fascinating fact, but they've been restored to keep the ruins from flooding. So they were built so well and engineered because stormwater was such a problem that they're essentially serving the same function over 2,000 years later. And the image of that ceramic pipe in the corner, that's actually even older. That's a Neolithic walled town in China that had to move stormwater around underneath their roads to get it out of the way. So modern engineers are still solving the same challenges in almost the same way. So what happens when all that rain runs off the urbanized environment? So this graph compares stream flow during a rainstorm in a natural mountain stream and also in an urbanized area. So we're looking at the urbanized area here first. As you can see, the water runs off almost immediately after the rain begins. It creates a fast, high-flowing volume that pulses and can lead to flooding. There's massive influx right after it stops raining, and then it dries up and returns to a dry channel again. So if you compare that to the natural setting, that teal line, it's just a much more gradual curve. So it starts, the flow starts later, and it peaks softly, and then it kind of gently returns to base flow. So you can see that even when the storm ends, we still have sustained water flow in that system. So before we move off from this slide, I want to point out one more thing. That top image is actually from California, and I think it was 3 years ago or so. They had massive stormwater issues. I think it was the winter of 2020, maybe. It was all over the news. California has a particular problem with this, but it's a great example. So California loses an estimated 2.27 million acre-feet of urban runoff into the Pacific Ocean annually. So that's more than 700 billion gallons, and that's enough water to supply up to 6 million people for a year. So the way that we've traditionally managed stormwater is could use some work. Okay, so we've seen how water behaves after a rainstorm and how dramatically different those outcomes are between a natural and a developed landscape. Let's zoom in a little bit closer and look at where water actually goes in the modern built environment. So in nature, rain's a resource. In the modern built environment, it's moved away as rapidly as possible. In our cities and suburbs, we've designed the landscape to treat it as that problem, moving it away as quickly as possible. So when rain's falling again on those hard surfaces, it's getting funneled into our storm drains and gutters and culverts that are all designed to whisk it away. Even water from irrigation runoff, like overspray from sprinklers or park strips. Like this also, you've probably all seen it, sometimes in commercial environments this time of year, when they're starting up their sprinklers, how much of that is just flowing right into the storm drain. So once it disappears down the drain, we really stop thinking about it, out of sight, out of mind. But where does it go after that? So most of it flows through a system of underground pipes and channels and ends up directly in our streams, rivers, and lakes. It picks up velocity as it falls on these hard surfaces into our storm drains, and it moves faster than most natural systems can handle. So it circumvents our natural hydrology that we've discussed. It doesn't move into groundwater recharge. It instead rushes off and does not soak in. This may be a surprise to some of you, but it doesn't pass through any kind of a treatment plant, really anywhere in the country. It's not filtered and it's not cleaned. Whatever the water picks up along the way, it carries with it. And here's a significant issue: is the volume. In these areas where we do get hit with a rainstorm, that volume does a huge amount of erosion to stream banks. And as you can see here, it's disgusting water. It's picking up everything that we leave on the ground. So what are the impacts of stormwater runoff? So stormwater runoff water is considered the universal solvent, and that's because it does pick up everything that it touches. So the big ones are sediment, toxic chemicals, and excess nutrients. So first, sediment, fast-moving water. hitting areas with no vegetation causes erosion of topsoil. We see this a lot in construction sites. Our toxic chemicals, stormwater washes off oil, grease, antifreeze, pesticides, herbicides, de-icing agents. Everything that's on our driveways ends up in the storm drain. Even small amounts can add up pretty quickly. In Utah, we often don't get a significant amount of precipitation in the summer, and then we'll start getting our monsoonal season later. So everything that's been building up on our surfaces is ending up in our waterways. And excess nutrients, this is a big one that we'll focus on a little bit more as we move forward. But fertilizers, yard clippings, pet waste, they all contain nitrogen and phosphorus and some potassium. And these are nutrients that in small amounts aren't damaging. They're found everywhere in any kind of decaying organic matter, but in high concentrations, they cause significant issues. And one more little point on pet waste before we move on. It's a massive source of bacteria in waterways. Maybe not something that we always think about, but 1 gram of dog waste, that's about the weight of a business card. Contains 23 million fecal coliform bacteria. And we'll talk about some of the systems that can purify out things like that. But when it's moved over the surface, those things are not kind of removed by natural processes. So algae blooms. This is one of the most, probably the most visible sign of stormwater pollution that we see here. All of these photos were taken right here in Utah, at Utah Lake in the Great Salt Lake. All Utah Lake except for the one at the bottom left, which is the Great Salt Lake. But when excess nitrogen and phosphorus wash off of lawns and roads, they feed explosive algae growth. And this isn't just an eyesore for us. Algae blooms can release cytotoxins. So these are harmful to fish, wildlife, people, and our animals. Every year, dogs in the Salt Lake Valley die after drinking contaminated water. There's usually 2 or 3 in the area that die, unfortunately. And it's it's to the point where you can see that on this map there's significant health advisory watches over a lot of our water bodies and in the heat of the summer, which is when things really take off. So Utah Lake, some people will say, oh, Utah Lake has never been pristine, and that's true. It's always had high phosphorus levels, but that resulted in high levels of macrophytes, which are your bigger, what we traditionally think of something like seaweed, bigger plants with leaves. The transition is that we added a lot of nitrogen. So phosphorus existed in high amounts, nitrogen dumped in at high amounts, removed that limiting factor, and we switched to very high levels of microphytes, these little plankton that make the water anoxic. They reduce oxygen, and that's in addition to those phytotoxins also. So this presentation isn't all depressing. We're getting into some really exciting ways of handling issues with stormwater runoff, but we'll cover a few more just to show the impact here in Utah. But how bad is the water quality here? It's a significant issue. This map comes from the Division of Water Resources, or Division of Water Quality rather. So the red areas indicate Category 5 waters, the most heavily polluted streams and rivers that fail to meet basic water quality standards. I don't know if any of you like to fish, but among all 50 states, Utah ranks 3rd for the number of rivers and streams that are impaired for aquatic life, unfortunately. That's nearly 35,000 miles of water bodies where fish struggle to survive. To give you a sense of scale, that's 10,000 miles more than the Earth's circumference. But it's not just about wildlife. Utah is also number 7 in the country for waters that are too polluted for swimming and recreation, with over 11,000 miles listed as impaired. So while we often think of Utah as clean and pristine, the reality is that many of our rivers and lakes are suffering, and stormwater runoff is a big part of that. Okay, so we've just seen that stormwater runoff affects water quality, but the impacts go beyond pollution. Here's what this runoff really does to our watershed. So first, it prevents the groundwater recharge. Second, it reduces water availability in our basin, across the entire basin. Third, it's causing significant erosion. And finally, it's polluting our waterways. So stormwater carries with it everything we leave behind, and it sends it straight into our rivers and lakes. So it's not just an inconvenience, it's disruptive, and it affects water availability basin-wide. So the natural way that rain is managed in the natural environment, in the wild areas. So when we think about how rain is meant to move through the environment, there's no better example than wetlands. Wetlands are nature's built-in water treatment system, and they're remarkably effective at what they do. When water flows into wetlands, it slows down as it moves through plants, soils, and sediment and settles out, and pollutants get filtered. So here's what these landscapes are capable of. They trap up to 90% of sediment before it reaches rivers and streams. They remove nearly all of the excess nutrients, like nitrogen and phosphorus, through plant uptake and microbial activity. They break down harmful chemicals, and they sequester and lock away heavy metals. They reduce flooding naturally by holding water and releasing it slowly over time. They recharge groundwater thanks to those deeply rooted native vegetation created by deeply rooted plants. And this is how water is natural. This is how it's supposed to move into our systems. It's slow, it's cleaned, and then it's absorbed. Wetlands are often called nature's kidneys, and they really are remarkable in their ability to clean and renew our water supply. So wetlands are among the most valuable ecosystems on Earth. According to global research, wetlands contribute up to 45% of the total value of all ecosystem services worldwide. That's more than any other type of ecosystem. This value is estimated at 47 trillion per year. That's a recent study that came out 2 years ago that looked at global free services provided by wetlands. They help regulate our climate, support biodiversity, and provide resilience in the face of droughts and floods. So this photo is of a montane wetland meadow in the Uinta Mountains. It's a great example of how these systems really silently shape everything around us, because it doesn't look any different than any meadow, but this is a wetland with wetland specific species, and it's achieving all of those free ecosystem services. So one of the ways that we've tried to mitigate the issues created by development is artificial wetlands. Artificial wetlands, or sometimes called managed wetlands, these systems are designed to mimic the function of natural wetlands, especially in areas where our ecosystems have been altered and these areas have been lost. Across the West and in Utah, this is a critical system that we've put in. They provide support for migratory birds, endemic fish, and they also help manage salinity in some of our more delicate ecosystems. And restoring them, it plays a big role in dust pollution also, which is becoming a more significant issue as the Great Salt Lake is starting to recede. So they function very similarly to natural wetlands, and even in highly altered landscapes, they can help restore water quality. They can help stabilize our soils and rebuild some of that lost ecological resilience. Right now, Utah manages around 300,000 acres of wetlands along the Great Salt Lake. And again, this is one of our most effective tools to reconnect hydrology and protect our water for the future. But in the urban developed areas, like the one shown here, downtown Salt Lake, natural wetlands are long gone. Historically, this area was a part of an extensive system of wetlands and floodplains, but now it's almost entirely covered in roads, buildings, and compacted surfaces. And this isn't just a local story, it really is a global one. So we don't necessarily stand out as worse than other places. This is an issue that's everywhere. So since 1700, we've lost approximately 87% of the world's wetlands, and the rate of loss is accelerating as population increases. So between 1970 and 2015 alone, we lost 35% of the remaining natural wetlands. So how do we make a neighborhood like this, with its roads, rooftops, lawns, and storm drains, begin to function more like this? So we're trying to rebuild natural function in the land to slow water down, let it soak in, filter out pollution, and treat rain as a resource, not as a waste product. How do we do that? So the way that we do that is low impact development. And this is an exciting change in our approach to how we manage the water that falls on our systems. It's defined as an approach to create pre-development hydrological function through the mimicry of natural processes. So you see on this slide are examples of real-world low-impact development features. We'll talk about each one in a little bit more detail in the coming slides. But we have detention and retention basins that temporarily store runoff. They're highly visible. We see them everywhere. In many cases, they're required by local city laws at this point. They're permeable hardscapes, bioswales, bioretention basins, and even green roofs are considered a form of low-impact development. So they're practical engineered solutions that start to recover some of our lost hydrological function. They help protect our water quality. Some of them focus on reducing flooding, and they recharge our aquifers, all while making our communities more livable and improving the pedestrian experience, as you'll see here. So to break down the concept of low-impact development a little bit more, this diagram shows the spectrum of stormwater strategies from mechanical to biological, and they're organized by how water moves through them and what function they serve. So on the left, you see more mechanical solutions like detention basins that temporarily hold water and release it slowly. And then we move along through to retention basins, and then through filtration systems like vegetated swales that start to clean water. And then on the far right, you see infiltration treatments where water soaks into the soil, recharges our groundwater aquifers. So we'll get into all of those in a bit more detail. These options from low impact development typically work best when they're layered on one another. So we'll talk about each one, but some work better in certain areas, some are more feasible, but we'll get into each one to show you kind of what they do, and then what you can do on your own home landscape too. So detention and retention basins, these are, like I said on the last slide, the most common strategies for how we deal with stormwater in our communities. You've probably driven past these, or you've certainly been in them. On the top left, that's Sandy City Park. So they're often created as dual use. So you'll see there's higher elevation in certain areas, and they're meant to hold flooding stormwater and prevent some of the downstream effects that we saw on the earlier slides. And there's detention basins, or I'm sorry, there's also retention basins, like the Sugar House Park example we have here, which is built to hold water permanently. So it provides long-term storage and controls stormwater over time. That 100% of that water, my understanding comes from stormwater. And most cities require new developments to include at least one of these systems in some capacity to manage stormwater. So there has been a movement over the past few decades to start incorporating these systems into our communities. So these two primarily function for flood control. And then we have swales. This is another one you'll see commonly. They're shallow sloped channels designed to move water across the landscape. So they primarily function for conveyance, but also to slow water down in the process and mitigate those high flows. They tend to work pretty well in moderate storms. They don't work so well in intense storms, and typically the end point of the conveyance is usually a surface water body. So they do pick up some, they slow things down, they allow some infiltration, but it's primarily a source of moving water across our landscape. So another issue with a lot of swales that we see are grassline. People will say that lawn, cool season grasses are good for stormwater management. I actually heard that today in a conference, and that is true. But these areas, if we utilize traditional materials, like lawn, for example, they require irrigation, fertilizers, and herbicides. And there's not enough vegetation to achieve all of the services provided by a wetland. So they have a purpose, they are useful, and they're a wonderful thing to have in our communities. But as we kind of move forward in where low impact development has gone, we'll see that there are other strategies that are even better. So permeable pavement, this is one that we see in many places. Here at the Conservation Garden, we have it. This serves to infiltrate water where it falls. So it helps recharge our groundwater and reduce runoff volume. It's a simple and effective option for homeowners. Water flows through the porous gravel joints and into the ground and reduces peak discharge rates, kind of capturing water where it falls. And green roofs. So this is a really innovative one. It's a little more niche. You're probably not gonna do it on your home for some obvious reasons, like maintaining a garden on your rooftop. It's expensive to install, but it's also comes with some safety concerns. If you do want to do it, there are resources out there to learn about it. But these are great in highly urbanized areas where there's no room for landscaping at the ground level. And since there's not a one-size-fits-all solution, it is a great opportunity to put in to achieve some of the low impact development aspects from an area that is available in cities, which are rooftops. They're also excellent at achieving another. So they slow down water. They achieve some of those aspects of a wetland in that they can trap it. The water moves more slowly before it ends up draining off, excess drains off, but much of it goes up through transpiration, and it has an added benefit of urban cooling. So you can actually get, some of you may not know, but urban heat islands are a result of heat absorption into our paved surfaces. Concrete stores a tremendous amount of heat. So replacing these areas with, excuse me, gardens reduces that heat tremendously. And now we're going to move to bioswales. So bioswales are a newer but increasingly common form of low impact development. It mimics the function of a temporary wetland. It slows stormwater as it moves across the land, and they're typically lined with better things than lawn or just a rock aggregate. So we include things like deeply rooted plants, water-wise plants that can help soak the water into the ground, trap more of the sediment, and filter excess nutrients before it reaches the storm drain. So they still usually serve as a means of conveyance. Bioswales go beyond basic flow control, though, and incorporate those aspects. And then some even include things like weirs. You can see in the top right photo, it's that small structure that looks like it's holding the water back, and that is its intent. They're sometimes called beaver dam analogs in wild areas, but it's another element that's added to create a more natural stream element where you have either things that are blocking flow or stopping it to slow it down, or you can actually build them. So it slows it down, it creates in that bioswale some more infiltration, more aspects of slowing that water before it reaches its endpoint. And then we have bioretention basins, which combine the best of really everything here. We can see it's achieving every element of the slow to the spread to the treatment. They reduce flooding, recharge our groundwater, and clean runoff before it reaches our rivers and lakes. At a residential scale, we call these rain gardens. They're simple, beautiful features that can make a big difference in our stormwater system and restore some of that. So one of the things that does the heavy lifting in a bioswale and in a bioretention basin or rain garden are the plants themselves. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. Deeply rooted plants are a key element. They don't just look good, they slow water down, they spread it out, they help it soak in where it falls. And roots are natural filters. They pull pollutants from the water, and they improve overall water quality. And the deeply rooted plants are shown on this slide. Some of them go up to 15 feet deep. We have these in the Conservation Garden Park in our bioswales. And those serve as channels for water to move into the aquifer. So the plants pull up some of that water, but they actually help facilitate its movement also. So it's mimicking the natural function of wetlands and floodplains, even in the middle of a city. So low impact development on the homeowner scale. So we've looked at it at a large scale. We've kind of taken you from what can be done on a community level down to homeowner level. Almost all these things can be incorporated in our landscapes, in our home landscapes. We've got rain barrels, which can collect and store water for later use. These are a good option for a small roof, something that's not going to get a ton of water. It's a good option for near potted plants or something that might need some supplemental water. We've got permeable pavers, and that's achieving that flow control aspect. So if you're putting in pavers, or if you're putting in some kind of pathway, it's always good to consider whether or not it's permeable. For the purposes of our turf replacement programs, we only fund areas that have permeable pavers. So this is something that we're thinking about, and it's an excellent option for you. And there's bioswales. These are often used to convey water away from a home to a rain garden. You can move that to other parts of your landscape, and then an area that's downstream of it, it might be an area that's more a viable spot to put in a little rain garden. And then, of course, we have rain gardens, which achieve many of these, actually all of the free ecosystem services provided by a wetland. So rain gardens, small scale, big impact. In addition to all of the free services that we've talked about, they also help boost biodiversity, creating some wildlife habitat in your yard. They have the beauty and curb appeal of any garden. And we'll look at some pictures near the end of the slideshow for inspiration, but they're really not much different than any other garden bed you have. They're just shaped like a bowl. So these really represent the heart of Rethinking Rain for us. There's all of the aspects can be incorporated, and anything that you're willing to do that's going to prevent stormwater runoff has a major benefit. But rain gardens are kind of the peak of that benefit that you can achieve at a homeowner scale. They also reduce flooding and drainage problems. So if you have an area that's puddling, frequently puddling, you can design a rain garden to absorb that and move that in more quickly. And they lower irrigation need also. That's another added benefit that goes beyond just achieving pulling water back into our aquifers, it's just a great way to achieve water savings for irrigation. So we're going to cover a couple of studies that were pretty impactful. If you're thinking, and he's seeing a lot of information about how wonderful these systems are, but what does it do in the real world? So these images are from a neighborhood in Burnsville, Minnesota. So they actually they took a control neighborhood and a treatment neighborhood, and in the treatment sites, they installed rain gardens in all the yards, and then the control site they left it in the grassland or primarily lawn landscapes that they had. So they took pre-construction runoff data from the two sites, and they found that runoff was essentially identical. And then after the rain garden installation, the blue there is the control site. The study site is the red. So you can barely see that ticking up on the amount of runoff. They found that the rain gardens trapped 90%, over 90%. I think it was almost 98% of the rain. So rather than any of it moving into the storm drains, it was trapped in these homeowners' rain gardens. So how impactful is rain harvesting on a residential scale? Well, it's very impactful. So again, stormwater runoff was reduced 90%. Natural hydrology was restored. And the actual intervention was fairly small. So these rain gardens were designed by engineers. So they were designed to capture the maximum amount of water possible in these landscapes, including curb cuts to pull in water that ended up in the road. But they were, on average, about the size of a parking space. And if you look at them, they look just like a beautiful planting bed. They're really not much different than any other planting bed that we would install. You might be paying a little bit more attention to finding deeply rooted plants that would do particularly well in these environments, but a very small intervention with a huge positive effect. So we saw how a small intervention, a simple rain garden in a community made a measurable difference in a very precipitation-rich state like Minnesota. But you might be thinking at this point, that works there, but in Utah and the desert, is this still a viable thing for us to do, or is it worth it? Now, I think that's a fair question. The answer is yes, and there's a few studies that indicate its value. So a long-term study, what we're looking at here in Santa Fe, New Mexico, where the average rainfall is just 14 inches. So it's significantly more drier than here. This was put to the test. Researchers compared two landscapes that receive identical amounts of runoff from a parking lot. One had a shallow rain garden basin installed. It was planted with native grasses, wildflowers, and a few woody perennials. So not designed other than essentially a native landscape with a shallow basin. And neither site received any irrigation. They relied entirely on rainfall for the course of the study. Over the course of 7 years, the rain garden consistently held more soil moisture, much deeper into the soil profile, even during periods of extended drought. So the plant basins supported healthy, resilient vegetation. And the control site, it dried out and the plants struggled to survive. So whether your goal is to stretch your irrigation or support native plants or build your drought resilience, harvesting rain where it falls works, even here in the desert. So putting the pieces together, let's just imagine what this might look like for you. So we're not going to get into how to build a rain garden in this class. We have an upcoming class next week that'll get more into those details. But just let's look at some of the options here for what you can do and how you can design a rain garden. So again, these are really gorgeous landscapes that we can put in. So they often have elements, especially bioswales of rocks and a channel, and then you can move that to a planting bed that is densely planted. The more densely you plant it, in my opinion, it's more beautiful when it's densely planted, but it's also achieving more of what we would want to achieve, which is slowing down the water, spreading it out, sinking it in, and also storing it where we can, like in rain barrels. So this is how we turn stormwater from a problem into a resource. So rain barrels can come in all shapes and sizes. Some of the ones shown here really blend in really well. You can create almost like a raised bed look. There's the old whiskey barrel style, which is a cool element to have. You can paint a mural on it if you want to get creative, or you can hide it behind like an artificial rock in your landscape. So you can do a lot more than having some kind of ugly element at the base of one of your downspouts. And bioswale design ideas, both of these images come from people that have participated in some of our landscape programs. You can create almost separate rooms in your landscape. Beautiful areas that by adding some elevation differences and some rocks, it's the cool natural look that you can add with, of course, the benefit that it's integrating function along with the beauty. Some more bioswale design ideas from also project participants, and you can see it here functioning really well. It's kind of a mix here between a bioswale and a rain garden. It's storing some of that water, but when it fills up the max capacity here, it's draining off. So it might not achieve 100% of stormwater retention, and if that's not the goal, you just want to achieve most of it. Something like this, an element like this, does that in a great way. And here we've got a backyard rain garden design. Really love that design. If you like the natural look, it's a cool element to have. And then on the right, this homeowner has really incorporated every aspect that you can imagine. There's a rain barrel here at the base of that rain chain. They've got a green roof. They've really gone above and beyond. But it's gorgeous. It's beautiful. It's I think a desirable landscape for a lot of people. So there's a lot of different ways that you can create these landscapes that trap our stormwater. And generally, the key element you want to think about is you're just creating little basins, little contours to start storing some of that water on your landscape. And they come in all shapes and sizes. So these are three fairly small little rain garden elements that were put in. All three of these homes are built on a slab, so there's no issue having it close to the house. Generally, we recommend about 10 feet away from a foundation. But if that's not an issue, there's no issue kind of trapping it right where it falls. And a few more, these just illustrate how beautiful a rain garden can be. You don't have to overthink it. You can, and you can get into engineering it. That's something I'm doing on my home landscape. But you can achieve pretty much all of the free ecosystem services just by doing a simple installation, planting it with native or native adjacent plants, or any ornamental perennials that are deeply rooted. And in our environment, that's going to function perfectly well and reduce your irrigation needs. So just to recap, the concept here is to slow our water, spread it out, sink it in, and store it. Rethinking rain is how we move from a crisis to an opportunity, one drop at a time.
The first question that I see here is, what happens to a rain garden in a drought?
That's a great question. So most of the species that you would plant in a rain garden are prairie species. So they're deeply rooted, like we showed in that slide. Most of these plants are very well adapted for droughts. So that's less of a concern. If you chose to plant something other than one of those plants, which is not an issue because you're not going to have soils in Utah that are inundated all year. They're not going to be getting constant water moving through them. So their soils are going to dry out. But if that's a concern, if you're planting something where you're not sure, I think one of the things that we've discussed here is we still recommend that people drip irrigate their rain garden areas. We're not saying don't irrigate the area, just put in drip. If it's on its own separate zone, you don't have to water it as frequently.
Yeah, it sounds good. I have a few small rain gardens in my yard, and I still have drip irrigation to them. And I have to use that drip irrigation relatively often, like I would in my other planting beds. But yeah, anytime it rains, I can skip a week or two usually between watering in those areas. So let's see. How far should a rain garden be located from the house slash foundation?
Generally, the recommendation is 10 feet. And next Thursday, Christina is going to get into a lot more detail on this in her rain harvesting for homeowners class. If you have sandy soil and your home is built on a slab, you don't necessarily have to do it that far, but that's a good rule of thumb.